Good afternoon. Welcome back to another great edition of Talk of the Towns, where we talk all things town. This is part of our Supervisor Series, so we are talking to three supervisors across the state, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But before we get to them, I'd like to remind you that you can find us here on your favorite listening platform or viewing platform, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. You can find us in any one of those platforms. And if you are enjoying our show, please make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share. That helps us. Like, subscribe, and share. Let's get more subscribers. Let's get the word out about all things that are town related, which I happen to find to be very interesting. And I know my guests do as well, and so many of our members. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the interpersonal dynamics between the supervisor and the other elected officials within the town, and maybe some of the leadership styles that different supervisors have, or how they lead a town in such a dynamic type of organization as a town. It's a little bit different than most organizations, and so we're going to delve into that. But before we do, I'd like to introduce our guests. First, I'm going to start with our current president of the NIOP board, Mike Marinaccio from Dickinson, Broome County. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
Staying in Broome County, we have Supervisor Robert Mack from Union. Welcome, Supervisor. And my own stomping grounds when I was born and raised in Monroe County, not in this town, but close. Steve Schultz from the town of Henrietta, Monroe County. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
So again, thank you all for taking time. I appreciate it. I think this is a fascinating area because, when I was supervisor, I alluded to a few minutes ago, so many residents had an expectation that the supervisor is the boss of the town and can tell everybody else what to do. And I would get calls all the time, tell the highway superintendent to plow this road, tell the clerk to do this. And really, that's not how it works. So let's start with maybe delving into the dynamics between elected officials first and foremost. And why don't we start? The president has perks. Let's start with Supervisor Marinaccio.
Thank you. Well, I think you said it in the beginning, treat everybody equal, whether they're councilman, or town clerk, highway superintendent. You just have to work as a team. Unfortunately, the people that we represent don't look at it that way. So no matter what goes wrong, it's always the town supervisor. Call Mike or call Steve or Rob because it's their fault. And you learn how to deal with that. But yeah, treating everybody equal, keeping open communications with all of the officials here. We have a great team. And it's probably the reason why I've been doing this for such a long time. And I'm very proud of it.
I think communications you hit on is probably going to be very key as we continue this conversation and treating all as equal. Supervisor Mack, have you had an instance where you felt there was some tension between the highway superintendent or the clerk in your office, or maybe a town board member or anything like that? I think you're on mute, Supervisor.
Yeah.
You're still on mute. Why don't we go to Supervisor Schultz when you work out your mic, and we'll come back to you. Supervisor Schultz, anything to add to that or the question I just asked?
Yeah, so we actually have it even a little rougher in that for us, all those otherwise elected positions are actually now appointed positions. And so, for instance, my clerk started long before me. She's been around for some while, but she's not actually up for election. Our highway superintendent is appointed by the board as well, as is the assessor. So all those positions that can either be elected or appointed in Henrietta, they're all appointed. So there's no question, like somebody was like, well, your assessor did a bad job, you should fire him. I'm like, there's actually no ability under New York State town law to fire an assessor.
Right.
And by the way, their term is much longer than my term.
7 years, is it 6 years? 7 years.
Yeah, 7.
But it's certainly one of the things you run into. But I often make clear. I say I can make a request of the highway superintendent, but New York State highway law is crystal clear. The ultimate decision is the highway superintendent's. So like when these developers come in and say, he wants this, I said, well, then that's what you got to do. If you want that road to be dedicated as a town road, it needs to meet the requirements that he dictates. That's the law.
Right.
Right. Supervisor Mack, it sounds like you got your microphone worked out.
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. we
Okay,
can.
wonderful. Well, I'm lucky in a way. My highway superintendent is appointed and serves at the pleasure of the board. So definitely have some control over our highway as supervisor. As far as my clerk and my other elected officials, which are my judges, luckily they've always seen the supervisor, I think because we control the budget strings, as they defer to us for most things. I did have the uncomfortable situation a few years back where I had to sit a judge down and pretty much beg him to resign due to mental decline and some other issues. And graciously, he did. Being an elected official, I did not have the power to remove him from the bench, of course, as you know, and it's quite a lengthy process going through the judicial system. But I was able to get him to look at reason, and with the help of his wife encouraging, we were able to let him resign from the position. So that was my most problematic situation with an elected official.
Yeah, it sounds like you went through a lot there. That could not have been easy at all.
Hard conversation to have with someone.
Yeah, oh, no question. So let's stay on the town board for a moment, because really, as I started, it's generally believed that you're the chief among equals. So, there's an expectation the supervisor is the chief elected. It's referred to that as a chief elected, as the one that, signs the vouchers, who implements the organizational, carries out organizational design for the policy the board sets. How do you find working with the board? You preside over the meetings. How do you handle that when you're really there among equals? You don't have veto power, but you're presiding over that group. Supervisor Schultz, let's start with you. How do you interact with your board during, say, meetings and going forward with policy decisions?
Sure. So I've always had a mixed board. Most of the time it's been 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And I'm kind of a centrist. So basically it's very simple. We build consensus. There was a meeting early on where one of the board members of the opposition party was giving me all kinds of trouble. And I turned to him and I basically said, look, I'm trying to get to a consensus where we can all agree. But if not, I'm happy to call a vote right now because I know I have 3 votes. And, it was funny because I didn't even remember. It wasn't particularly noteworthy. It was just my reaction because I was getting frustrated because he was being contrarian. He wasn't trying to get to solution. He was different from that point going forward. And in fact, it was funny. 6 months later, one of my fellow board members pointed that incident out to me. I said, "Oh my God, I never thought about that, but you're right." We've only had in 8 years, we've had only 1 vote go along party lines. And it's largely just because we get in, we discuss things, again, there have been a few supervisors who were more, I'll say, dictatorial, for lack of a better term. That's not how I am, although I'm going a mile a minute, but I'm always happy to get feedback from the board. One of the things you talk about, you say, well, we do all these decisions, sure, but 90% or more of any decision we make requires town board approval. Right. Any major expenditure, even you can argue minor expenditure, right? I think my limit is up to $12,000, but that's it. Any contracts, just so many things require town board approval, that you really need to have a good working relationship. My background is actually industry, corporate America. And, it's interesting because there was something talking about, in fact, they were talking about with presidents that in general, presidents who come from business have some of the worst track records in history. And I actually look at it, to me, there's a distinction that needs to be made. There's a difference between somebody who comes from a family-owned business where they are the only person in charge. They don't have to answer to a board. They don't have to answer to anyone else. It's my way or the highway. That does not work well in government. But, I came from a board, corporate board. We had a board of trustees, or a board of directors, excuse me. We had shareholders that we had to answer to. So those are very analogous. Essentially, the taxpayers are our shareholders and the town council is our board. And effectively, I'm the CEO. So it's a very similar. If you think as CEO, you can run roughshod over your board of directors in a corporation, you got another thing coming. Right. It's the same thing in town board. If you want to try to run roughshod, you're going to run into issues.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy. Supervisor Mack, anything to add to that?
Not really, other than I'm lucky I have a all Republican board that I'm working with right now. It hasn't always been that way, but right now it is. And I would say it's a respectful board, and I give respect. I expect respect back. When it comes to the meetings, they allow me to run the meeting because somebody has to. I put out the agenda. I run the day-to-day meetings we have. We have a lot of dissent. We have a lot of differences in opinions. But my motto is always listen, 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 and try to stay quiet and absorb what your board is saying. A lot of times I know I might be a tiebreaker, and so I always vote last. Even in work session, I ask my board to vote, and if it comes down to a 2-2, then I know I got a hard decision to make. And if it's 3-1 or whatever, then I know I have an easy decision to make because the decision's already made. So that's one thing I always do, is try to be the last to vote. And I think it keeps a lot of that decision is off my table before it gets there because of that.
Yep. Good thought. Supervisor Marinaccio,
Yes, sir.
over the meetings, have you found it to be difficult? And I know you've only been doing it like 20 some odd years.
30 some years.
30 some years. So you must have something down.
Yeah.
How do you approach that?
Well, I kind of echo what Steve was saying. What's helped me in my career as a town supervisor or a town leader is I come from a management background. Almost my entire adult life, I've been in a position of management, from first line supervisor up to general manager. And that really was very helpful for me, learning how to cope with all the various concerns and complaints that people have, and you learn to listen, which to me is probably the most important aspect of being a town supervisor. Learn to listen. May not agree, but at least listen, and you might hear something that you could agree with. My town board, they've been around almost as long as I have. And neither one of them, including myself, have had an opponent for probably the last 26 years or so. And I think that's because we work well together. We don't argue. If we're going to have an argument, we could have certainly a rapport with each other during the meeting, but we try to iron things out before the meeting. And that's when we get back to communication. They know ahead of time what the main part of the meeting is going to be, what the agenda is going to be. And I communicate with them almost on a daily basis. They probably get a little tired of it after a while. But to me, if you have the knowledge, you can make probably more concise decisions. So yeah, I work well with my board. We're predominantly Republican here in the town various positions, but we do have one Democrat, and he's fantastic. We work with him well, and no dissension. I can't remember a nay vote, to be honest with you. And sometimes it works against you. People start to think, what is this all rigged? But I can't remember a nay vote in a number of years. So yeah, working together, There's a sign in my office right behind me, and it's 3 letters, TEAM, team. Together, everyone accomplishes more. And that's my model. That's what you have to do, especially nowadays. I'm sure Steve, I know Rob, I see Rob all the time. It's extremely challenging today to be an elected official in any capacity.
Well, and I think, should it concern you that in 26 years, nobody's wanted your job? That speaks volumes to the fact no one's running for this. But, one area I wanted to explore just for a moment, not off topic, but off beat a little bit, is each of you, interestingly to me, mentioned party affiliation in the conversation about the town board. But going off of Steve's analogy, I've always agreed with what Steve said, because I would always say to the residents that we are basically a board of directors, as Supervisor Schultz talked about, that come together and make decisions, in my case, to run a $23 million organization on behalf of 100 employees and 30,000 residents. That's what we do. And politics really, I would say, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'd be glad to explore this a little bit, but politics have very, very, very little to do with running a town board. Of all the levels of elected officials, I think local government has the least political partisan impact. But that said, we're not getting elected in a vacuum. We have to go through a party system. So maybe talk a little bit about that dynamic. And I don't know, Supervisor Mack, if you want to jump in first, because you haven't gone first yet.
Okay.
Start that conversation.
Well, I tell people I'm not a politician. I'm a public servant. When people say to me, what got you into politics? How do you like politics? All those kind of questions. I say to them, I'm not in politics. I'm a public servant. I said, I'm here to make sure when you turn on your faucet, you have water. When you flush your toilet, it goes down the sewer. Your streets are plowed. Your parks are open. Your street lights are on. I said, what's going on in Washington, though it's important to us, does not affect your daily life. And I affect your daily life. What the town does affects your daily life way more than what happens in Washington or even Albany, for that matter. So I try to always deflect politics out of local government, because we're community servants and we're here to make sure the trains run on time, basically.
Supervisor Schultz.
Yeah, so I agree with all that was just said. One of the things I talk about all the time is you might get elected on a party line, but once you're elected, you're serving the whole town, not just the residents with the same letter after their name, right?
Right.
So it's, it was interesting. So when I first got elected, it had been a Republican town for 32 years. And the political types said to me, you got to clean house. It's been Republican for 32 years. You got a clean house. And I said to him, that is the stupidest thing I could do, because they all know how to run a town. I don't. I know how to lead, but I don't know how to run a town. And,
Right.
When I got here, I found, I'd be hard pressed to tell you the party affiliations of most of the individuals. I know my 2 deputy town clerks, because when we used to do elections counting, you had to have one from a Republican Party and one from the Democratic Party. So that's the only reason I knew their party affiliation. I've since picked up occasionally on some, because they'll tell me, oh, I get the, Republican thing and I see this and they're saying this about you. But for the most part, like Bob was saying, we're public servants, or as I put it, I'm not a politician, I'm an engineer in office. It's just, there were 2 individuals who were politically motivated. One was very good friends with the supervisor I ousted. He found a job elsewhere. Another one same thing. He actually he quit, and he unfortunately was the only individual to interject politics. The first one I mentioned, I get it. He had a problem working for me. He had to report directly to me. It bothered him. He found a job elsewhere. He gave us plenty of notice. We were able to replace him, no problem. The other individual, upset, he was convinced I was going to lose re-election when I didn't. He waited. He was in the DPW. He waited till the first major snowfall and quit when they called him in to plow, so that I, hoping that it would make me look bad if the roads weren't plowed fully. Oh. That is 100% wrong. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. So like I said, I find that politics don't really play a part in it. The sole exception, so in those 8 years, the only thing that came along party lines was when Planned Parenthood came in for a special use permit. That was it. Everything else, it's been consensus. Party doesn't really play into it. We work well together. And if I could go on a little bit longer, I'll tell a story. We had my state assembly member is a Democrat. At the time, my state senator was a Republican, and I'll mention his name is Pat Gallivan. Harry Bronson's our senator. The two of them would work together across the aisle. They would put the community first, and they were good people. And I had someone come in and run, and he wanted my endorsement. And I asked him, what are you going to do better than Pat Gallivan? And he couldn't answer the question. And I said to him, well, he said, but, I'm Democrat. I said, yeah, well, so what? I said, that's not a reason to endorse you. You've got to tell me what you're going to do better than Pat Gallivan. And he said, well, surely you can't agree with all his political positions. I said, I don't agree with all of Harry's either. There's only one person in politics whose opinions I agree with 100%, and that's me. So it's just, unfortunately, if you go further back, and it sounds like Mike's been in office long enough to remember this, to have been around at this these days, it used to be two different ways to solve problems, right? Whether you called it conservative or liberal, Democrat or Republican, it didn't used to be us versus them. It didn't used to be the other side is the devil. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, politics have devolved, especially at the national level. Mm-hmm. It hasn't gotten quite that bad at the local level. There's pockets of it, but for the most part, people see, they vote for the best person for the job, not necessarily on party. Although, again, I'm seeing some people who, talk about they vote by color, red or blue. And to me, that's the wrong way to vote.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Supervisor Marinaccio.
No politics here. That's left in the sock drawer many, many years ago, as evident that we don't have opponents. I've made dozens and dozens of appointments over the years, to the planning board, the zoning board, my finance person, assessor, and so forth. I have never asked what party they belong to when I interview them. And once I finished interviewing someone, and then I always get board approval for just about everything that I do. That way there it's on record, and they are playing a role, which is important to many of my council people. But years ago, and I'll tell you a short story too. Years ago, the person who I ousted out of office, and he was a 3-term supervisor. Everybody had to be a Democrat. Everybody, no matter who it was. If there was a Republican running for the town board or for the highway department, he would take a really strong stand against them and spread, lies about them and so forth. Every appointment he made, it was a Democrat. It didn't work well for him. And for me, I think that when you get people of different opinions, whether you agree with them or not, to me, it's healthy. I listen to people. We're not always right, and we're not always wrong. Whether you're a conservative or liberal-minded, me, I'm more conservative, but I lean conservative. So, yeah, I agree with Steve and Rob. It's just There's no politics at the town level. And you see it at the state levels, of course. County level, I see it. And Rob, you'll agree with me. I think there's a couple of towns where politics sort of plays a role. To me, it does. It makes them look bad, and they get nowhere. They get nowhere. A lot of infighting. Rob and I
Yeah,
have seen turmoil in two of our towns. Turmoil.
yeah. They sound like children, in fact,
They
when you
really do.
the way they bicker and what the press reports, it's sad. It's sad.
It really is sad. And a
And
lot of it.
resignations. Two,
Oh my
three
God,
supervisors have
unbelievable.
resigned, councilmen have resigned. They can't even keep the elected officials from walking out the door.
I know, and a lot of that is because of control. So when the town, I'll never let. I mean, I would never worry about that with my current board, but we don't control to a point. You don't want to micromanage people. And that's what some of those boards that Rob's talking about tried to do. You just
Yeah.
don't do that. So yeah,
So,
work together, work as a team. You can't go wrong. Serve the people. Public servants, right, Steve? That's what we are. We're a public servant. Nothing more, nothing less.
so that's interesting. So anyone jump in on this one, because I think, Mike, you mentioned, you don't micromanage. That's kind of a
Mhm.
leadership principle, right? Supervisor Schultz, you said that you know how to lead, which I thought was very strong and interesting. So I'd like to get from each of you, do you each have a leadership style that you've adopted? If so, what is it? And how does that work for you? And if you haven't adopted a leadership style, how do you go about being the de facto leader in your community? And just start with whoever wants to jump in first on that one.
Well, Chris, if you don't mind if I go first here,
Absolutely.
I come from healthcare and business. I've done both in my career, and has been a manager or a director in both fields. Um, Managing healthcare was very different than coming to manage a town.
Mm.
In healthcare, I was an expert, and therefore I could make policy and I could train and I could teach and I could set policy as an expert. At the town, the supervisor rarely has the expertise of all the functions a town has. We may know a little bit about highway or a little bit about something, but we do not have the expertise to take over a town. Therefore, I let my department heads lead the town. I do meet with them frequently. I listen to them frequently. And before any type of change, I usually go quite deep in that department to get opinions on something we may be discussing to change because I want to be educated on both sides of every single issue. As we know, if you only listen to one person in a department, you may only get one view. So I always make sure that I interview or listen to a number of folks from a said department before we ever make a major decision about changes that we may be thinking about. I guess I always like to say, if it's not broken, let's not try to fix it. The town of Union itself runs like a fine-tuned clock usually. We have long-term employees that have been with us for many, many years. And they are truly experts and professionals, and I'm not here to mess with that. One of the things I think my most important job is I actually do more HR work at the town than I've ever done in a job before. And that is listening to employees, listening to ideas, listening to things that may be going on, and trying to help facilitate better communication among departments. Because sometimes I have a pretty big town, about 150 employees. Sometimes my departments can get going at each other. And so one of the big things I do is try to get those folks talking, and I try to be the facilitator for that communication.
Anyone else want to jump in on their leadership style?
Yeah, I don't mind. My background has certainly been very helpful and being a leader. Again, I was a leader in high school. When I went to college, I was in business management. Um, my entire career has been involved in leadership positions, and not only being the town supervisor. I just did a government class for the Binghamton University. I do a class every once in a while there, teach a class. And that's one of the questions that they ask. They want to know, how do you lead people, especially if they have differences of opinion and so forth. And just be nice, number one, listen, always listen. Like Rob said, if you listen and you show that you're interested, whether you agree or not, you're interested in what they say. That's always been the way I have played the leadership role. And I'm everywhere. As you know, Chris, I'm involved in so many things. I'm chairman of this and I'm president of that. And I enjoy it. I don't do it, for notoriety. I just enjoy doing it. And because of those leadership skills, it helps me to be. As a matter of fact, Rob, you're on the BMTS policy board, and I've been chairman of that, and Rob is vice chair. And you learn how to deal with people. When we're on the outside of our town, Rob, we do hear differences of opinion, maybe outside of our comfort zone, but we still get through them and we still come up with good decisions. So yeah, there's no secret. I don't think there's a secret. I think it's your attitude towards people and your attitude towards yourself as well.
Supervisor Schultz, so you have a leadership style?
Sure. So one of the first things I always talk about is the primary role of a leader is to remove the impediments that keep their employees from doing their best job. So that's why I always look at, I make sure all my, not just direct reports, but the people under them know that if there's an issue, let me know and we'll see if we can, resolve that issue. Because again, if we're delivering all the services, it's certainly not me who's delivering these services, right? And so, just to give you a quick example of one of those, it took a long time to plow our some of the cul-de-sacs because we have these big 10-wheel plow trucks in these little cul-de-sacs. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, what can we do differently? And they suggested, well, why don't we get a smaller truck for the cul-de-sac? So that's what we did. Problem solved, right?
Seems pretty common sense.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, you would think so.
Right. But how often do you hear common sense and government together? Get towards Albany. But, it's just, so that's the first thing. The second thing is communication. Out to your employees and especially out to your constituents. So the same election that I won to become town supervisor, a referendum passed to build a new public library, twice the size of the previous library and with 10 million in bonds. Well, the debt service on that bonds and the additional operating expense of the new library, that's going to be a significant tax increase. Of course, they all talked about it when they were, pitching and putting the referendum on the ballot. But I'm the one who actually had to implement that tax increase the following year. The political type said, don't talk about it. I'm like, you don't think residents are going to notice that the tax rate went up 25%? So I explained it and I broke it out and I showed them exactly where the money was coming from. Unfortunately, when they wrote the referendum, they didn't say up to $10 million in bonds. They said $10 million in bonds. So even though we brought the cost down, we still had to take out $10 million in bonds.
Oh, geez.
We had to, we showed what the additional personnel costs were. We broke it all out. And guess what? It was not an issue because people understood. I think sometimes politicians don't give the public enough credit. Yeah. They don't want to be talked to. They don't want to hear sound bites. They want the information. Let them make the decisions or, come to understand stuff themselves. So fortunately, going back to my college days, I was a news editor, sports editor, editor-in-chief of the college newspaper. And so I'm the one who actually produces our town newsletters. I will say there's not a single thing that is more likely to keep me getting reelected than that newsletter, because everyone talks about how great it is to understand, all the stuff, and even the things that don't work, we talk about,
Sure.
here's what's gone wrong and here's what we're doing to fix it, because not everything works. So that's a huge part. And then the third thing, basic principle I always talk about: praise in public, scold in private, right? When someone does something that's not right, you don't call them out in front of their peers. You call them into your office and you talk about it separately. You don't want to embarrass people. But conversely, when they do something well, you want praise. And there's two sides to that. One part of it's selfish, right? One is you want others to see that praise and want that praise themselves and to do well as well, especially the people who go above and beyond the call. We praise them all the time. It was funny because my predecessor used to I swear he'd get jealous when we have one of the best senior center directors in the area. We've probably got one of the best town clerks in the region. Talk about them all the time and just sing their praises. He didn't. He I swear got jealous of them, and it doesn't make sense, because you put those people in place. Everybody in that senior center knows, hey, he fully supports our director. She does a phenomenal job. Thank you, supervisor. Right? It doesn't make sense. When people let their egos get in the way of doing stuff.
That's a great point.
You're so right.
One of the things when I was supervisor, and even in this position here, executive director of the association, I've always believed the role of the leader is to accept all of the blame for whatever goes wrong, but take none of the credit for whatever goes right. And that's just the role of a leader.
That's
You
exactly
have to
it.
be able to accept that and live with that. And so when I was supervisor, I took the criticism on behalf of the board. But boy, when something went right, the board got out there and made sure that they got their name out there.
They always
Fine.
do.
Yeah, that was
Only
fine.
when there's a problem do I get told I'm the
I will
CEO.
say, I will give credit to my board, because they won't always allow me to deflect the praise. If it's something that I took the major lead in, my board will call that out. So I'm lucky. I don't have strong egos on my board, which is a great position to be in.
Sure is.
So communication definitely was brought up by all three of you, seems to be critically important. One thing I want to explore, and before I ask this next question, remind our listeners and viewers that we are with Supervisor Mike Marinaccio, Broome County, town of Dickinson, Supervisor Rob Mack, Broome County, town of Union, and Supervisor Steve Schultz, Henrietta, town of Henrietta, county of Monroe. And thank you all again for being here. This has been a great conversation. One of the things I wanted to explore in leadership real quick was, the concept of balance. We talked a little bit, I think all three of you mentioned a little bit about how you have the experts. You're not the expert, but you rely on the experts. And you kind of allow the people that know their stuff to do their stuff. And that's a wonderful approach. But sometimes I felt decision makers use that as a crutch, and they'll say, and I used to get frustrated with my town board, because my town board would listen to the highway superintendent, and he can come in and tell you that the sky is orange right now, and they would say this, well, he's the expert, and if that's what he says, that's what it is. And I push them to say, you know what, guys, we as leaders, we have something called judgment too, and we have to exercise that judgment. And if something doesn't sound right, because let's be honest about some of our department heads and our elected officials, sometimes they're pushing for something because it's good for their department. But your job is what's best for the town. And so how do you balance that? Because, you're kind of running into what an expert is telling you, but you're saying, that doesn't sound right. But you also have a perspective that nobody else has. And I say this to my department heads all the time. Hey, chief, you come in and you say you need 2 new cops. Well, the highway superintendent came in and said he needs 2 new highway folks, and the clerk needs 3 new deputies. We have to figure that out. You all have your needs, and you're telling me that's what what your department needs. but what's best for the organization? How do you balance that?
Right, that's a tricky one sometimes. When you first come on board as a town supervisor, they expect you to be an engineer in all aspects of town operations, water, sewer, highway, this, that, and the other thing, buildings, facilities. I knew safety. I trained people in safety, but yeah, you rely on a lot of people in the very beginning. But when you're in office for as long as I've been, you learn. And how do you learn? You learn by listening. And that's what I do. I have to listen. If my highway guy wants to spend 400,000 or $500,000 on a certain highway job, or the water superintendent wants to put in a $500,000 water line replacement, I ask a lot of questions and I listen, I take notes, and then I seek other opinions as well from the department, from the highway superintendent. So I don't want to be taken advantage of. And I think in the past, when I was first elected, which was like 1995 or 94, yeah, I think people took advantage of me. And I said, sure, you know better than I do. But now I know better. And you learn the hard way. What I love about my town and what I love about our staff here and our other officials is that nobody tries to take advantage of anybody. We all have learned, and I think a lot of this because I've led the way, but we've all learned to ask questions and be tolerant. And no idea is a bad idea. I mean, I welcome ideas. Sometimes you don't hear things for years. Let's juice up the thought, the thought process here. So yeah, yeah. I mean that's how you have to get by. If someone like Steve, just his predecessor, you're not gonna. He might have. I don't know how long he was in office, but nowadays you're not going to go too far. You're just not going to go too far. And I don't care what position you're in, whether you're in the town, county, state, you're not going to go too far. Now, if you're president, you might be able to get away with it. But oh, sorry, this is a podcast. So yeah, I mean that to me that's the bottom line. Listen and show people that you have an interest in what they have to say, and just work with people. The tough part might be if you disagree. So how do we do that? Well, you disagree by telling them the reasons why, not just saying, I don't like the idea, it's a stupid idea. Be specific.
Anyone else want to talk about balance? How do you balance?
Sure. So I'll throw in a couple things. One, talking about that crutch, one of the things you often hear is when council pushes back on something, they're like, oh, well, council said otherwise, so he can't do it. I point out to them, the job of council is to tell you your safest path. That's not always the best path. And their job is to tell you the risks associated with it. So just because the safest path is here, you may not want to take it. I certainly don't want to take the riskiest path either. but I should find, so, anytime anybody comes to stuff, there's often times where I'll push back on it if I don't think it's the right direction. Now, if they can convince me otherwise, then I'll say, you're right, let's stick with that. One of the things, I was very fortunate in that, so shortly after learning that I had won, I was told that there are 3 individuals you get sole appointment of, one of whom is your finance director. And it just so happened that my former CFO from Pictometry, she had stayed on when they sold the company, she stayed on with the new merged entity longer than I did. I was Mr. Pictometry, so they didn't want me there anymore since they're now Eagleview. But she stayed on for a lot longer, and she finally decided, you know what, I'm going to go. Well, that was October. 2 weeks later, I get the job, and I pitched it to her. I say, how would you like to work half the time for a third of the money? And she accepted it because she's one of these workaholics. I still have to kick her out of the office, to go home. I said, we don't pay you enough for you to put in the kind of hours you used to put in at Pictometry. Yeah. But, she's always been very good in terms of understanding the budget. She quickly learned government accounting. I've learned all of the I quickly learned all of the various state laws that govern how a town operates, things like that. Fortunately, I've always been a quick learner because you learn stuff like, as an example, we talk about with these other, it doesn't even have to be elected officials, right? Our library, they put in, we don't get to control their budget. That's the board, the library board controls their budget. Now we get to determine how much we give. And so they had given too much raises to, at this time, we held our tax levy flat this year. To accomplish that, we couldn't have more than a total of 3% increase in payroll. Theirs was greater than 3%. So we cut back what we were contributing by that dollar difference and said, you've got to figure out, I would have loved to say, here's the increases I would cut, but ultimately it was their decision. So one of the other things though that we did that just astounded us when we got here, our department heads were not part of the budget process. They didn't set up their own budgets. We couldn't believe it. There was also a use it or lose it mentality, which is the best way to waste taxpayer dollars. Right. And we make it clear, if you don't need it, don't spend it. Right. We're not going to reduce your budget next year because you just don't always know. It could have to do with time that you couldn't get to that project. It could be, there's stuff, especially in sewer and drainage, there's contingencies in there in case something goes wrong. So our department heads are very good now at we've come in under budget every single year. And they're very good. They're always looking for ways to do things, more service for less cost. And so they're a huge part of it. And it's as Mike was saying, it's a team, right? It takes a team to accomplish that.
Sure does.
And so, that's helped tremendously. There were one or two individuals who couldn't quite get on board with that. And we've been able to move on from them and promote individuals from within who could get on with that. So we've got a really healthy team right now that, works together to make all that stuff happen. And that's how we're able to, continue to operate. We've seen tremendous growth, a lot of new facilities, a lot of new services, yet 5 of the 8 years I've been in office, we've held our tax levy flat, not the rate, the levy. And that's thanks to my team finding more efficient ways to do things.
Right. Supervisor Mack, any thoughts on balance, finding balance between all the different things you have to do to make a decision and the people you have to listen to?
Well, I think I'm lucky I have an extremely strong Commissioner of Public Works, and I lean on him heavily to tell me when the highway line is possibly a little bit over extended, or they're asking for a little bit too much for capital or whatever may be. And that goes for parks, that goes for code, that goes for planning, because my Commissioner of Public Works really oversees, he's the town executive as far as the day-to-day operations of this town. So I really lean on him heavily. If I didn't have such a strong Public Works Commissioner, this job could be extremely different and way more difficult. But because I'm lucky enough to have that, I'm able to balance what I do, which is, when I took office, I was told I had one job, and that was to watch the money. I was always told that I'm here to protect the public's money and to do my very best that it's being spent wisely and that it's being spent honestly, and that we're providing a fair product to the taxpayers for what they're paying, and that I'm also being fair to my employees and the public employees. We've been lucky the last few years, I would say probably 5 or 6, that we have been doing a lot of market studies with other towns, finding where we maybe are underpaid, maybe where we're overpaid. And we've brought a lot of equity to the town to the point where we have the best relationship we've ever had with our unions because of that. We made sure that every time we go to the table to talk, we have evidence of what else, what our competition is doing all over the southern tier, whether it be Elmira, even a little bit up into Syracuse area, but definitely all the towns and villages and small cities. We take a look at what they're paying, what their benefits are, all those things, and we try to create a very equitable environment so we can keep employees here and especially trained employees. We had a period 6, 8 years ago where we felt we were nothing but a training ground for the county and for New York State. The minute we would get drivers trained to run the plows or do blacktop or whatever the job may be, we were losing them to larger, deeper pocketed entities. And we have stopped that bleeding, and a whole bunch of them have actually found that the grass wasn't necessarily greener, and they've come back to us, which has been a real feather, I think, in our cap that we've really improved the conditions here at the town.
Interesting. All three of you talked about the importance of building a good team, the importance of relying on your people, the importance of taking care of your people. I think that's very interesting in our discussion, and I think that could be a whole nother podcast. Personnel issues and team development, which is great. This has been a very engaging conversation. I think you've provided a lot of insights into leadership, into the role of a town supervisor. And so this last question, before we wrap up, really offer any last thoughts you like. But one of the things I'm interested in is, do you feel your residents truly understand all that the town does and or all that you do, the role of a supervisor? And if not, how do you educate them, or I think Supervisor Schultz talked about a newsletter. I'm sure that's probably part of it, that communication. How do you
I'm going to talk to you about that, Mr. Supervisor Schultz.
So basically, does the public understand a town and the role of a supervisor? And if not, what do you do about it?
I'm not really sure if they understand fully, and the newsletter does help. We have an extensive 30-page newsletter. We only do one newsletter a year, but we post an enormous amount of information on our Town of Dickinson website, so people know what's going on. What I'm very frustrated about, and ours is a small town. Rob's town is over 50,000 people. Henrietta's a pretty good sized town. I only have a little over 5,000 people. And I could have a public hearing where we're going to increase taxes 100%. And I'm telling you, 2 people will show up. Water rates are going up. Nobody shows up. And it's only after where they get to learn, oh my God, we didn't know. That's the frustrating part about being a supervisor. And I do my best in our newsletter, which I pretty much put together myself. I get articles from all the different department heads. I put it all together, send it to the printer, but it's extensive. It covers every aspect of town government and what we do, including the judges, which at times are somewhat reluctant to talk about their job, and I understand that. So, yeah, if you're one of those supervisors like me, and Rob can attest to this, I'm out there. I'm everywhere. I do a radio show. Rob is on a radio show once in a while. I'm on TV. I'm in the newspaper quite often. I always have something to say about something when asked. So people get to see the supervisor, specifically me as well. If something is going wrong in the town of Dickinson, it's got to be Mike. So we're going to call him up, and that's fine. I'll take a call about anything except for court. I get we have the second busiest court in Broome County, and I get a lot of calls from people from New Jersey and New York City and Manhattan to get tickets going through on the highway here, and I can't deal with those at all. So yeah, I wish people would have maybe a little clearer understanding. I try. That's always been my goal. The newsletter, as it is today, is 1,000% better than what they used to put out years ago with a two-pager. They didn't really say anything. So that's right now, the newsletter and the website are the two tools that we used, to educate our residents.
Anyone else on that?
Yeah, so we definitely, I'd say it's probably about half and half. So the folks who really read the newspapers, pay attention, they get it. And one of the ways I know that then too is, so I'm heavily involved in responding to social media. It's a blessing and a curse. It's great because it's a way to get stuff out there, but boy, do you get a lot of just wrong opinions. And you say, well, an opinion can't be wrong. Sure, it can. It can be factually wrong. And I respond constantly to emails, any of the emails that come in, whether through the website or directly. And I give full explanations and typically same day response. And so I get a lot of positive feedback for that. Even people saying, well, whereas I don't agree with it, I appreciate you writing back and taking the time to explain why. The folks who don't take that time come up with some great theories. I just got someone mad at me because I allowed one of the plazas to be sold to a company out of New York City, and they're raising the rents. And how could I let that happen? Because I have no legal authority to stop it. Other than that, I had someone who complained that I sold RG&E to a international company, and his rates are going through the roof. Thanks a lot, Supervisor. Again, kind of a little bit outside my jurisdiction.
Yes.
But even just stuff like, so some of the stuff people don't want to hear that it's not your jurisdiction is state routes. The worst potholes, bar none, the worst roads are state routes. And they don't want to hear that it's not a town road. And so this past year, we're one of the communities that opted into cannabis, and we put them right on our main commercials drag. And so those shops are doing well. We're getting about $1 million a year now in cannabis tax revenue.
No kidding. Wow.
So one of the things we did with that is we went to the New York State DOT, had a meeting with them and said, we want to be able to fix potholes on the state roads because our residents don't care that they're not ours. Why aren't you out fixing the potholes? Well, they only do hot patch. So we had to go buy a machine that could do hot patch asphalt mix because, of course, the plants are all closed. We had to have the crash attenuators. We had to have the arrow sign. So it was about $100,000 worth of stuff. And then we had to put our folks through the proper training. So this winter now, we'll be able to repair potholes on state roads. And we'll just coordinate with the New York State DOT because, to be fair, they're covering all of Region 4, which is the whole Finger Lakes area. They've got a lot of roads. But we focus on Henrietta, right? So, there's a lot of stuff that, again, a lot of people understand what is and isn't in our BELWEC. The biggest one is, how can you let someone build there? Well, people have property rights. That's one of the things that people fail to understand. And I always say, you want it to be empty? Get your neighbors to bot together and buy that property. Or the one I love hearing all the time. My realtor told me that lot was forever wild. I said, well, I lied to you. There are some towns in Monroe County that have very wealthy areas and their tax rate's higher and they buy up empty properties. We're not one of them. We have the lowest tax rates in the county. People move here for that reason. So we're not going to change. We're not going to become our neighboring town. If you want that, move to that town. People move here because it's very affordable. And so, with that said, we do what we can from incentive zoning to encourage reuse of existing buildings, things like that. But, that I would say is the one that people have the least understanding is our authority to say what can and can't go into a business, who can businesses sell, what can they operate. I'm like, you're limited from zoning, but I can't. And Mike, I told the folks on my board when Chick-fil-A came in, as you can imagine, a lot of the folks in the Democratic Party, they don't like the message from the founder of Chick-fil-A. They wanted us to turn down their special use permit. I'm like, it's freedom of speech.
Oh my gosh.
I don't agree with what they say, but they have a right to say it, and we can't turn down their special use permit because we don't like what they say.
Oh my word.
And so, that's and
You'd
they
be in court.
right. Well, I told them that, and everyone got it. And guess what? They're in. I said, if you don't like them, don't ever go to the restaurant.
It's interesting, Supervisor. I got to tell you, same type of thing. Most people wanted government to be limited. They didn't want you to impose anything on them until it came time that they wanted you to impose something on someone else. And I always say to them, powers you think I have are powers you don't want me to have.
Right.
They always try to have it two ways.
Yeah.
I'll give you a perfect example of that happened to me when I was first running. We have this thing about the definition of a single family. It's 3 or fewer people, period, or 4 or more who are related and living in a family style. And you get into the whole thing. And I had questioned, a lot of people don't understand that that's where the thing comes from. They just think that there's a rule that rentals can't have more than 3 people living in them. And I had asked the question, why is it the same 3-person limit, whether it's a 1-bedroom house or a 4-bedroom house? That doesn't make any sense. Well, this one neighborhood got all upset because this one individual had been buying up any houses that go up for sale and turning them into college rentals. And they were like, our family neighborhood's getting taken over. And I said, well, when I looked into it, I said, the town can't restrict it. But guess what? You have an HOA. You can, because anyone who buys in an HOA takes some of their property rights and turns them over to the HOA. So if you as an HOA want to pass a rule that you can't have, owner occupied rentals only, you can do that.
Sure.
Well, we don't control our HOA. So I got someone who was interested in running for a judge. She said, how can I get my name out there? I said, you can do pro bono work and get these people control of their HOA from their builders. About a year or so, they get it. I say, congratulations. Now you can ban, selling to rental properties. Some of the same people who were complaining about their neighbors who were rental properties said, well, I don't want to do that because that'll limit who I can sell to.
Yeah.
That's right. You can't win. Supervisor Mack, we'll give you the last word on this one.
No, all I can say is, as supervisors, I think our responsibility is to communicate with the press, with the residents, and get the word out to our folks. We really only hear from them when they're upset, and they do feel we have way more power than we do. It comes to homeless, it comes to code, it comes to, I have people call me up every day, want me to clean out the homeless, want me to fix the house on the corner of their street because it doesn't look good. And I have to tell them every day that this is America. We don't do that without a process, and just because the house may look a little run down doesn't necessarily mean it's up to code violations, but again, I think as supervisors, we just have to do our very, very best to communicate with the folks out there.
You ever feel, and I know this happens to the two of you folks, I know it's happened to Chris, it's happened to me quite a few times where I'll get a frantic call from one of my residents and they won't even tell me what the problem is. And it's like, well, tell me what the problem is, and I'll see if I can. No, you just come here. You have to come to my house. I need to show you. And so, and this happened to me a couple of times. I went to the house and basically they were mad at their neighbor because his downspout was pointing towards his house. And this is God's honest truth. And it was on a street that's inclined. And the neighbor that was complaining was on, whatever you
the
call
low
it.
side.
It was on the low side.
Yeah.
And when I told him, I said, I have no authority. I can't tell this guy where to put his gutters. He said, they didn't want to hear that. They
Yeah.
just did not want to hear that. I tried to get these two guys together. That was a mistake. Break them apart.
Managing the neighbor disputes is a whole nother podcast.
Neighbor be
Oh
neighbor.
my gosh.
So what you should have done is pass a town code changing the laws of gravity so water flow problem solved.
Perfect.
Changing the laws.
Oh my
Gentlemen,
gosh.
this has been great. This is indicative of that. We went way longer than our normal time, so that's
Yeah, but that was fun.
it was fun. I think we got a lot of great information. I think our listeners and viewers are going to enjoy this. And I want to thank Supervisor Marinaccio, Supervisor Mack, Supervisor Schultz. Thank you for your time, your leadership, all your service to your community and to the association. And as our readers, our viewers, and our listeners know, we'll be back again with another round in a couple of weeks on Talk of the Towns, and it'll be another Supervisors Roundtable.
Excellent.
Gentlemen.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Take care,
Bye-bye,
guys.
guys.